Hey guys, today I'd like to clear up an often used and almost always misunderstood term that's found in the New Testament of the Bible, and that is a Judaizer. So, okay, we have this idea of the Judaizers. We know that they were attacking the New Testament church with their own doctrines, their own philosophies, and too many times you hear people calling each other Judaizer every time they talk about keeping a commandment or resting on the Sabbath day or keeping the feasts in the Bible. And that couldn't have less to do with what a Judaizer actually is and was in the Bible. So that's what I want to try to clear up a little bit is what were the Judaizers? What were they doing? To get some context, the first thing I want you to understand is in the New Testament period, we're talking the Messianic day, in that area around Jerusalem, what you had was essentially two groups of people. You had the people from the southern kingdom who had come back from Babylonian captivity, years and years before. That was, the kingdom of Judah. And Judah had become very entrenched in their own traditions. They kept Torah to the extent that they understood it and their traditions allowed them, but along with Torah and along with keeping the commandments that their God had given them, they also kept a lot of different traditions that, well, their God didn't give them. That's just things that they made up along the way. However, to the kingdom of Judah, aka the Jews, those traditions were of tantamount importance. They were as important, and some even regarded them as more important than the commandments given to them by their God. So in their mind, their right standing with their God was dependent upon their observance of their traditions as much as it was dependent upon their obedience to the commandments Yahweh gave them. So now, fast forward, here we are in the New Testament period, and what was happening in the New Testament churches? Well, you had Gentiles that were coming into covenant with Yahweh, and they were starting to obey the commandments, and little by little they were learning every Sabbath in the synagogues what Moses wrote and what they were supposed to be following. Well, here come the Jews, and when I say Jews, of course I'm talking about religious Jews who were of, the descent of the kingdom of Judah. And they were having a hard time either letting go of those traditions when they decided to follow Messiah, or they hadn't decided to follow Messiah. They were just, completely Jewish. And either way, these people were coming to the Gentiles in particular that were following Messiah, and they were badgering them because they weren't keeping the traditions. This wasn't about commandments. This was usually about traditions. Now, even Messiah, before, he died, he actually faced some of the same things. You'll remember at one point, the Jews came up to him and they accused him because his disciples weren't washing their hands before they ate. Well, there is no commandment in Torah, in our God's instructions. There is no commandment that we wash our hands before we eat. But the tradition of the elders of Judah was to wash your hands. So they came up to him and said, look, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? Why don't they obey the tradition of the elders? And, there was another time over Messiah eating on the Sabbath with his disciples that, they came up and again they accused him and they said, hey, you can't pick food and eat it on the Sabbath. And he said, well, sure I can, and he explained a little bit about their understanding of work that's prohibited on the Sabbath being incorrect. They labeled a lot of things as unlawful on the Sabbath, which according to Torah really weren't. So again, This was them trying to impose their traditions on somebody who really had no reason or need to be obeying their traditions. So now for the Gentiles, we had Judaizers, Judaizers, okay? These aren't people that are trying to lead you into obedience to the commandments found in the books of Moses. Judaizers are people who are trying to lead you into the traditions of the southern kingdom of Judah. And it's, kind of what we would call today rabbinical Judaism. That's another religion. So what was happening is, they would come up and say, hey, all of you brand new Gentiles, that have just come into, this way and have just come into obedience, you need to be circumcised immediately. No, no they don't. That was the tradition of Judah, perhaps, but that's not Torah. Remember Abraham. Abraham was called out by Yahweh and started following him. He faithfully kept every commandment that Yahweh gave him. And guess what? He was not circumcised yet. In fact, he was even considered and called righteous well before he was circumcised. He had his son, and on the 8th day, his son was not circumcised. Wow, okay, that's a commandment, right? But there's a time and a place to do the circumcision. Okay, well, there's not a place, but there is a time. And that time is not necessarily on the 8th day. If your father is not ready to receive the circumcision, the child is not ready to receive the circumcision, even if it is the 8th day. So Abraham had to learn a little bit more. He had to get to a point where he was ready to walk in the fullness of covenant, with the fullness of understanding of Torah and his responsibilities as a right-standing citizen of that kingdom. Then, and only then, was he ready to receive circumcision. Likewise, the Gentiles coming into Torah and coming into obedience to Yahweh, they were brand new. They were not ready for circumcision yet. That comes later once you've reached a certain level of maturity. Also, they were coming up with other traditions, and this was a constant struggle between the New Testament church elders, the Gentiles, and those who, again, just could not let go of their traditions. So that's what a Judaizer is. This is not somebody who's saying, hey, you're supposed to keep the commandments. That person is correct. That person is trying to steer you onto the right path. You should listen to that person. The Judaizer is the person who's trying to put the cart before the horse, trying to push you way beyond the point that you're actually at, but more importantly and more commonly, this is the person who's trying to lead you into tradition, hand washing, only walking a certain amount of steps on the Sabbath day, lighting candles at sunset on the Sabbath, and things like that. These are not found in Scripture. These are not the law of our God. These are traditions of men, and people that would impose tradition on you, those are the Judaizers. So that's it. That should give you an idea of what a Judaizer is, what a Judaizer is not, and the next time, if ever you're called one, now you should at least be able to explain a little bit and help the accuser understand what it is they're talking about.